Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. I am Diana Barnes. I'm the chair of our special interest group on forensics and women's reproductive mental health. If you're joining us for the first time at our salon, we're so happy to have you. If you are coming back for more, thank you for joining us again. I live in California. I have been an expert witness in this larger field of women's reproductive mental health for more than 20 years, involved in probably, by this time I've lost count, but probably around 90 cases involving all aspects of women's reproductive mental health. My esteemed colleagues today who will be presenting have also been involved as forensic experts. And I can speak for, in the United States, Dr. Spinelli, Dr. Laufer, myself, we live in the United States. And in the United States, justice for women who are criminally charged is really an uphill battle. It's often so discouraging and not uncommon for women to receive sentences from 25 years to life, and in some cases, life without possibility of parole. We know that these cases are so difficult because the court has a very limited understanding of perinatal mental illness in the United States, and certainly doesn't recognize these crimes as a separate category of criminal behavior. And so often judicial decision is based purely on motive. So in the United States, even in the same state, a different judge with a different jury on a similar case could wind up with a different verdict or a different sentence. So in our special interest group, we have really tried to take a more global perspective in our conversations and our discussions, looking at how can we facilitate change. And we understand that criminal charges against women in these cases really go far beyond postpartum psychosis and infanticide. So today, we're going to take a look at what we're now referring to as the unperceived pregnancy in our group, more commonly known as pregnancy denial, but we're hoping to change the language for a variety of reasons that we're going to discuss. And I would ask you, as you join in today, that you would give some consideration to, can we think of this reproductive anomaly diagnostically? It's patterned in terms of the absence of pregnancy-related symptoms. It's patterned in women's experiences of giving birth. It's patterned in how babies succumb, and it's even patterned in how babies are disposed of. So we hope these brief presentations are going to generate some thoughts and questions and let you into where we've been, the evolution of research, and where we are now. So let me introduce you to our panel, our very esteemed panel. I'm so honored to be alongside them. Dr. Margaret Spinelli. She doesn't know this. I don't think she knows this, but she really is. She's been my mentor. She has done some of the foundational and seminal research in this field on denied pregnancies. She's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons and at Weill Cornell Medical College. Dr. Claudia Klyer, let me read her bio so I don't forget anything, is an adult and child psychiatrist and psychotherapist, graduated from the Medical University of Vienna and completed her residency training at the University of Innsbruck, Austria, and the University of Vienna. She was a postdoctoral fellow at Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia University in New York. She's been at Drexel University with Professor Pamela Geller at the College of Arts and Sciences. In 2013, she was appointed Associate Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Medical University of Vienna and is head of Pediatric Psychosomatic Department of Pediatric and Adolescent Medicine at the Medical University of Vienna. Her research interests are perinatal psychiatry, especially child outcomes, and specifically filicide in the context of perinatal illness, psychopharmacology in pregnancy, and pediatric psychosomatics, and one of the foremost researchers in the area of unperceived pregnancies and subsequent neonaticide. Dr. Brooke Laufer is a clinical psychologist in Evanston, Illinois, who practices analytic psychotherapy in private practice, also trains and supervises new therapists. Her focus is also on perinatal mental health, in particular postpartum psychosis, running groups for survivors of postpartum psychosis. doing research, writing articles, and speaking on this topic. In addition, she also works as an expert witness for women who have committed a crime during the postpartum period, namely filicide. And she also has a groundbreaking and wonderful book out now by Routledge. So I'm going to let Dr. Spinelli go for it, Meg.
Okay, hold on. Let me go for this. Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay. So I will be revealing my age. In 1994, I received a call from Jani Kumar, who was really a pioneer in our field. And he was the director of the mother-infant program at the Bethlehem Hospital. And I worked with him over there and basically learned perinatal psychiatry. So I got a call from Channy, and Channy said, Meg, would you please go to Rikers Island and see a English woman who was found carrying her baby, her dead baby, through Kennedy Airport, and she's now in Rikers Island charged with murder. Hold on. Okay. So I know we're changing the name, but overall, denial of pregnancy is an attempt to avoid an intolerable reality. Prior of the knowledge of the fact must exist in order to deny it. Because when I examined these women, I was struck at the denial, but also that when I examined over those early years, 16 women, their story all sounded the same. And this is a gist of what it is like with denial of pregnancy, or I forget what Diane is calling it. There's a new word, and we're not going to be using denials, but this is unthinkable pregnancies. These women have a nonsensical or a paradoxical attitude towards contraception. What I found was their family history was one of violence or incestuous homes. Pregnancies, sex was forbidden, discussion about it. And there was also sexual abuse. They also, many of them said that they hoped that somebody would notice. And that's very odd because, you know, there was one woman who delivered at, she was 32 weeks gestation, and she was a champion swimmer, and her coach did not even realize that she was pregnant. This was the day before. Now, they usually, though, remembered it all at the time of delivery. And Catherine Bonnet in France, she had this psychodynamic formulation that the presence of the fetus triggered reemergence of traumatic childhood memories. Boundaries between the fetus and the psychic experience became fluid. Rather than confront the traumatic past, they eliminate the fetus. Now, this was Catherine's hypothesis. This was just, you could read some of the cases, but this gives you a little bit idea. This one case by Brzezinska, this one study, 27 births, one schizophrenic, they all denied pregnancy until term. The symptoms, they had none, or they attributed to other causes. They no longer denied it at birth or on their way to the hospital. 20 of 27 had menses or spotting. 15 had little or no weight gain. And the sum was for Basinka, denial of pregnancy is an inadequate response at childbirth, which often results at the death of a newborn. So at that time, when I had taken the case that Chani Kumar had asked me to take, it received a lot of media attention. And because of that, I started to get calls for, from lawyers who had women who were charged with neonaticide and therefore charged with murder. And this is it was clear to me that what happened during pregnancy was that they dissociated and that therefore there was denial of the pregnancy. And so they would go into labor and, they would identify the fetus or the neonate as something other than a baby. And the one thing that was really odd, they had unassisted deliveries, complained of almost no pain, and also many of them did very unusual things with the neonate. For example, one woman left it in the office file cabinet and she went on vacation. And it wasn't until her coworkers identified a foul odor. Similarly, Chani's patient from England, from London, she was carrying the dead baby through Kennedy Airport in order to take her home to England. But of course, she was found at security. I just think that was important because Chani Kumar said, "Isn't it funny, Meg, odd, that if she had gotten to Heathwick, yeah, if she had gotten to Heathwick, there would have been psychiatrists at the airport, but at Kennedy Airport, she was arrested for murder." So with that introduction, I did hear the same stories from these same women. And so I just felt that there must be something to this more than these are just bad girls as they were reported. So I'm going to leave that to everyone else now so that they can describe their experiences, more contemporary experiences of this phenomenon.
As I'm listening to you, Meg, one of the things I wanted to add is, as we're looking at language and how do we call this, I know we are aware that in the research, there are so many different ways in which this has kind of been referred to or labeled, right? Unthinkable pregnancy, disavowal of pregnancy, cryptic pregnancy, denied pregnancy, concealed. So we're still in this process of we know this exists, and what's the language that we can use that is going to somehow stimulate the court into thinking about this, in a different way. The other thing I think, which is problematic before I pass it off to Claudia, is that if we look at the research, a lot of the research seems to suggest that these women don't have any mental illness. And I think that's also problematic. But we can certainly talk more about that. But Claudia, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing my screen here. And I would also like to thank Meg, because she was my mentor at Columbia. I participated in her study, and she told me this story about the British neonaticide offender, and told me everything about it. And this was the first time I learned about neonaticide. So thank you, Meg, for introducing that to me.
Always, always.
I will talk about definition and clinical features. Then the topic we're just talking about the terminology, the role of trauma and abuse, like Meg has already introduced that issue. And my focus will be on the denial of reproductive potential, because the whole issue starts well before pregnancy, and the question of the category in DSM or ICD-11. So the clinical features of neonaticide is that the definition is the killing of a newborn within 24 hours after birth, or when the woman is still under the influence of birth. In most countries, we have legislations taking specifically judging this as manslaughter, having a specific legislature for this crime. These women are young teens, but the new publications, also our data shows that there are older women. The naive, insecure, no previous pregnancy specifically is US literature. In our data sets, it's also different. We have high fertility rate in our sample. No partner living with parents is always not always true. We have some living with their parents or with the partner. And it's very important to note that the most important risk factor is pregnancy related. It is the, as we now call it, the unperceived pregnancy followed by the unassisted birth. So this is the risk factor. And of course, as mentioned before, no bodily signs of pregnancy, and then the unassisted birth and left to die or killed. A German research team has described diagnostic criteria in 2003, which is more than 20 years ago. And I think it's very interesting to look at it, because they are still valid, even though it doesn't explain the precedence and the reason why it happens. The uncertainty of the pregnant woman not to be pregnant, the missing of the pregnancy-related signs or the reinterpretation, the unself-consciousness when visiting a doctor when presenting with pregnancy-associated problems such as back pain and dysuria. So these women visit doctor, and even doctors are then unconscious of the pregnancy. Then the same for social situation, which could lead to the detection of pregnancy, like swimming pool or normal activities. If they have a relationship, they are having sexual relationship in the usual frequency and with contraception use, if no wish to conceive. So the partners always tell court and police that they were not aware of the pregnancy until birth, and very often it's not believed that this is possible. At no time of pregnancy there is thought about abortion or other measures like safe haven, anonymous birth, etc., adoption. There's a total absence of preparation for birth or what could be done afterwards, and the misinterpretation of the contractions as the beginning of labor and taken by surprise by the birth process. And this is like this story we hear all over. In our sample, at the time, these were 23 cases. We had in 82% no knowledge of the family and the friends regarding the pregnancy and birth. So it's not only the women who are not, who feel the pregnancy is not there. call it, there is a term negation, denial, concealment, but we really prefer to have a term, unperceived pregnancy, that covers all these different phenomenon, because we know from the data that these phenomenon overlap. So it might be at one time women have a middle knowledge, then they try to conceal, then there is denial. So we really need to have a term that is more appropriate. A recent article by Watson and Angelotta, who is also from our group, I thought was also interesting, that we have to also distinguish the physically versus cognitively pregnant status. Usually the recognition is between 4 to 10 weeks. I think this is interesting to know. And in women with pregnancy denial, it can be, as we know, up to birth or even after birth, because the denial can continue and women insist that they have not given birth and that this is not their baby. I will probably not go into detail about Catherine Bonnet. I'm really happy that Meg already cited her. I think it is great work that she did, because in her sample she compared women who committed neonaticide and women who gave up their babies for anonymous adoption. And she found out that they were, it was the same group and they had the same issues, as Meg told us already, the traumatization, the abuse, rape, incestuous family, etc. This is the book. She's only published in French language, which is unfortunate. Geste d'Amour, very interesting, her stories, very detailed about this these cases she describes. I came across an article from a Belgic group in 2013 with the title, "Can Denial of Pregnancy Be a Denial of Fertility?" And this is a case report of a woman with 6 pregnancies. She had 3 anonymous adoptions, so she gave up her child to adoption without giving her identity. She had 3 children, and her 7th pregnancy resulted in neonaticide. And she was realizing that she was pregnant during birth, and there was no contraception. When she was asked after all this time and all this pregnancy why she would not use contraception, she explains that she thought each time that pregnancy will not happen. So this is a very nice description of this denial of reproductive potential, and this brought me to the idea that we could look at this phenomenon in our data set, which is comprises now 55 neonaticides in Austria. The total is 69 cases, but 55 are, we have all the information. The group as a whole were pretty uniform. So we tried to do a Latin class analysis to see if there was a possible within group differentiation, but we couldn't find it. So the repeat cases of neonaticide are not different to single cases. If the women were old or young, all these cases were similar. There was no difference. Denial, concealment, if this was mentioned, and also they had a high fertility rate. So we couldn't find a grouping in our data set. What we found, and this I thought was interesting, was this high adolescent birth rate. So yeah, they were younger. Here, 3% in the Austrian population, and 59 in single perpetrators and 47 in all perpetrators. And the contraception use. Here you can see, this is the Austrian percentage of contraception, which is 70%. And in the neonaticide perpetrators, it's 30%. And also what is interesting that they used unsafe methods. So they didn't use the methods that had a low Pearl index. So I really think this shows that this denial of reproductive potential plays into the whole in the whole development of this tragedy. Just a short mention of the situation in Austria regarding prevention. So we also have anonymous birth, and Austria followed the French law, and it was due to friendship between Catherine Bonnet and Austrian obstetrician, and he worked in France, and then he brought anonymous birth to Austria, and now it is really well implemented, and we have around 40 anonymous births. In Austria, we have 10 million inhabitants, and the neonaticide cases really dropped. Here you can see the European map, the green countries like France, Austria, Italy, and Slovenia. There is anonymous births. The yellow countries with restrictions, and the red countries, they don't have anonymous births. The black dots are the baby boxes or baby hatches. This is, we think, a more problematic preventative effort, because women have to give birth unassisted in order to then put the baby into a baby box. And we think this is a high-risk situation and it should be avoided at all cost. So we really opt for the free and anonymous births in all the hospitals, like it is in the green countries. It existed in the old times. So in 1784, in the General Hospital in Vienna, they started also anonymous births. And here you can see the hospital, which the buildings still exist. So if you come to Vienna, this was the mental hospital, this round tower. And here you see a picture where women were giving up their children for adoption to women from the countryside who wanted to have cheap labor. Many of these children died in their first weeks, but many children were given up for adoption, as these were, there were a lot of forced sexual relations at this time for in unmarried women working in the households. So is this is the anonymous birth or all these measures, are these the solution? We think that breaking the cycle of transgenerational transmission of trauma, abuse, and incest is the first goal we have to achieve. And we know it's a long way, because we hear about these tragedies all the time. We need all the programs in the perinatal field and childhood area, all programs like Selma Freiberg's work or Circle of Security to help avoid abuse and trauma. We need improvement in the courtroom, and we have also this publication where we have shown that even in Austria, where we have infanticide acts, it is not the way, it's not always implemented the way it should be. We need treatment order instead of prison or non-prosecution. So in Austria, it was interesting, like really some cases that were not even prosecuted, And others went for lifelong prison, which shouldn't happen in Austria because we have the infanticide law. So very troublesome. So thank you for your attention, and this gives credit to my co-workers Amon Sabine and Paula Fernandez Arias. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, so much. Before I turn it over to Brooke, as I was listening to you talk about the continuation of the denial, one of the things that I, and perhaps you've experienced as well, is that in the dissociative state, because there's so much of a distortion of sensation and perception, these women, while they might know they have given birth, don't believe that the baby is alive because they're in a dissociated state. They're not hearing heartbeats. They're not seeing the baby move. They're not getting signs of life in their dissociated state. And that then leads to what happens next. So,
You know, I've always thought that, whoops, sorry, it's Meg. I've always thought that at that moment that these women have a dissociative psychosis. I don't know if that's true, but it seemed like it was for me.
yeah. Thanks, Meg. Thank you,
Okay.
Claudia, again. Brooke.
Okay. I'm going to share my slides, and at the risk of, repeating some of the things that we've already talked about with scholars in this field, that everyone's been my mentor, specifically Diana, which I'm so grateful for. And I want to present a case study without going into as much theory as you guys have provided, but along the way, I will share some theoretical pieces. So we know that the majority of neonaticides, which is the death of the child within the first 24 hours, are related to unperceived pregnancies. And I personally like the language unperceived because of its relation to the word perception, which is really important when we talk about trauma. So even when you're looking at the DSM under dissociation, we talk about mistaken perceptions, blocked perceptions, distorted perceptions. And that's really what's happening here. It's not denied, it's not hidden, it's really unknown to the individual. So this is sort of a simple breakdown that I like to use. Unperceived means it's unconscious, it's dissociative, it's not secret, like I said, and it's really a defense mechanism, and that's a little more in the analytic language. But the dissociation is, of course, protecting the individual from something, protecting them from facing traumatic memories, like Meg suggested, or protecting them from facing potential future consequences for a pregnancy. So these are some things to think about when we talk about this case. This is a case that I've been working on recently. This is not her name, but she has given me permission to use some of her story as an educational tool, which I'm so grateful for. She is the liveliest, wonderful 17-year-old imprisoned right now in the Midwest. A year ago, she was convicted and pled no contest to a neonaticide. This girl has gone through complex trauma. She grew up in a household with a very violent father, several calls to authorities because of abuse in the house, and a profoundly neglectful mother. So an enabling mother who did very little to protect her kids. Her older brothers both sexually assaulted her. Her oldest one in particular started when she was 6 years old, and that continued until she was 15. And her other older brother started when she was 14, insisting that since she allowed the other brother to do it, he gets to do it too. And this was incredibly traumatic, obviously. So at one point she did try to share with the mom that the brother had been molesting her, and the mother denied it. The mother said there's just no way that that's possible. And she did end up sharing with some friends at school, and eventually it did get reported but not followed through on. So it was made known to the father, and he beat up one of the brothers, but that was the extent of what happened. So Kelly was doing all she could to escape this house of horrors. And of course, as a teenager, one of the things she was doing was using drugs and alcohol to self-medicate and hanging out with a, a risky crowd. So she was starting to see this boy. He was older than her. They were doing a lot of drugs and drinking together. And she believes that one night her alcohol was spiked with maybe a sedative, and she blacked out and he raped her. And the next day, and when she came to, she knew she had been raped, but she did not consider pregnancy. And then in the ensuing months, she did not perceive a pregnancy. She really remained in a dissociated state for the next 9 months. She was really checked out. She was still using lots of drugs and alcohol. Her drug of choice was Xanax, which a benzodiazepine is, really affects memory and perception. And about 9 months later, she went into labor. She didn't even know it was labor. She thought she was having period cramps. She stayed home from school that day, telling her parents that she had period cramps. And by the early evening, she was in her bedroom delivering her son. It was a very shocking delivery. It was very fast and very painful. She significantly tore. And what's important is that she doesn't remember much of it. Memories are just coming back currently. So I can't give you all the pieces, but we know that after she delivered, she went into the kitchen and took a knife and ended the baby's life. And she may have been considering severing the umbilical cord, and then decided to slice the baby's throat and stab its heart. She thinks would have happened, but again, we're not sure because the memories are still really blurry. She was depersonalized. She had no emotion. She went to the store to get pads and Gatorade. After that, she came back and her mom had discovered the baby in her bedroom. So then the police were called, and she was taken to the hospital, still no emotion and no memory. She said she sort of they helicoptered to a bigger hospital, and she remembered waking up in the helicopter. And then, of course, there's the interrogation tape where she's incredibly depersonalized and had lost a lot of blood, was very white, was very uncomfortable. One of the interesting pieces of this case is this intergenerational unperceived pregnancy. So we discovered in these collateral interviews that the mom's sister had an unperceived pregnancy. So that would have been Kelly's aunt. She had a 9-month unperceived pregnancy of twins in high school, and then discovered the pregnancy at the end of it, and sought treatment and had the healthy twins. This took a lot of work, and I'll get into this, but Dr. Lewis, who's here today, was key to discovering this. And there is some literature since we discovered this that I have found that has connected intergenerational unperceived pregnancies, which is really interesting. We don't know if that's genetic. It could be transgenerational trauma in family environments, lack of maternal bonding, lots of smart speculations. but it's not clear what the exact correlation is. Okay. I'm trying to move to the next one. There. So luckily, this lawyer knew about perinatal issues, and she found me and Dr. Lewis. And so we were able to thoroughly cover this case and go through all the documents and do multiple in-person interviews with Kelly. And then because her memories were slowly coming back, I've since done several follow-up and Zoom calls, because every time I talk to her now, there's something new that has come into perception. I gave her some assessments, and I normally just give assessments to help with symptom gathering. They're not necessarily diagnostic, but they certainly help me with diagnoses. I like to rule out bipolar. Of course, she scored high on the dissociative scale. She had PTSD when I met with her. And Dr. Lewis and I have now collaborated quite a bit on this case. Unfortunately, the lawyer has left the case, so we're sort of hanging, waiting for the next lawyer to pick it up again, which is really sad, because we have the sentencing hearing coming up. So my guess is it'll be delayed. These are the diagnoses I gave Kelly. For the unperceived pregnancy, this is what I typically use, the dissociative disorder with peripartum onset. It works. It's easy to explain. It's straightforward. And for her in particular, I added dissociative amnesia because she had lost so much memory. And the way I've really conceptualized Kelly's case, which is sort of, I'm sure you can glean as I've been talking, this trauma, the incest, is an incredibly severe trauma that she has gone through two of her siblings. Incest has been connected to unperceived pregnancy and neonaticide in the literature. It sets a woman up for acute dissociation, which is what she went through. So she had this pervasive affective dissociative disorder that started even before the pregnancy, but certainly was extreme after the rape, during the pregnancy, and after the delivery. She was unprepared for the delivery, as most neonaticide cases are. She had what Meg has referred to as la belle indifférence, which is that childlike demeanor of ignorance or naivete. She really could discuss and talk about this baby with no feelings afterwards. Since then, she has had memories come back, and she has been able to show a lot of emotion, thank goodness, so she can start processing some grief. She has now been able to name the baby. She's been able to look at pictures of the baby. We can talk about the baby, which is all really a sign of her healthy progression. But still, there's lots missing, not only from the pregnancy and the delivery, but the incest. So some of the risk factors for Kelly and for neonaticides in general are these violent, unsupportive households, unplanned pregnancies, rape, inseminations. Some of the important things that I like to look at are the interactions with the law enforcement and then the media, because they really guide the way a case goes. And for Kelly in particular, because she was so dissociated during the interrogation, this officer really led her in a confession. She offered a story and Kelly consented to it. Of course, she has a history of fear of authority, and neither of her parents showed up to the hospital or to the interrogation room. So she was on her own with a police officer and agreed to the story she was offering, which then became her story in the investigation. Of course, the media in her town had already prosecuted her. Some of the headlines are horrifying about Kelly, and that affects the judicial system, and of course the judge, and especially in a small town in the Midwest. So she had a lot of things piled up against her. And when she pled no contest, she got 20, she's can get up to 20 years. So that's the sentence that we will be trying to mitigate. So prevention for Kelly, it does seem as if maybe some family and some friends knew she was pregnant. We have suspicions that maybe the mom knew. No one acted on it. No one tried to intervene. There was one phone call from the school that went to the mom, who denied it, never acted on it. The school didn't do anything else. There was no school social worker who tried to intervene. Those are things that could have greatly changed the outcome of Kelly's life and the baby's life. Generally, it's salons like this that's talking about classification, right? Language. How do we really solidify what an unperceived pregnancy is? What language are we going to use? Because that is going to help us be able to identify and explain and educate courts on these issues. More education to parents and teachers and health professionals can help people spot and intervene in situations where someone thinks there's an unperceived pregnancy, which can lead to these neonaticides. All right, these are the references. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay.
Thanks, Brooke. Thank you so much. It is interesting about when we look at these cases about the family, kind of the family colluding in the denial. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Exactly.
we have some time, so certainly would love to open it up to questions, thoughts, ideas.
Hi, I'm Taylor. Here, I can turn my video on. I'm a medical student at Northwestern. I'm pursuing psychiatry. I'm a fourth year. I could not be more interested in this topic. And I've been interested in this topic since Dr. Angelotta talked about it my first year of medical school. And I'm curious, I know there's a lot of discourse around the trauma elements predisposing patients to this. But I think, in the current climate and growing abstinence culture in schools, and in the kind of the zeitgeist of the culture, if diminishing health literacy and knowledge about how contraception works and access to contraception is contributing to that, or if there's like literature particularly regarding patient education and literacy in this space.
When we did our comparison with case numbers of neonaticide from Austria compared to the Scandinavian countries, we found out that we had much higher number of cases. And one of our hypotheses was that we are still a very Catholic, a very conservative country, and that we lack general reproductive health care, like no contraception is free, even not for young people, and it's very different in the Scandinavian countries. So we attributed this difference to the higher number of neonaticides in our country. So this is what I have to contribute.
Does that answer your question, Taylor? By the way, you should get in touch with me. You probably live like around the corner from me.
Yeah, I do. I live in Streeterville. But yes, I think it does. I'm so curious to see how this topic progresses post-obs. And we're very newly post-obs, so I'll be following. Thank you all.
Yeah, certainly we know statistically that in areas where abortion was already difficult to access, there's higher rates of neonaticide. So we can probably expect that.
It's a bit difficult to have the exact numbers of neonaticides because you need to have a register where all the neonaticides go into within a country in order to really compare. And what we have realized, even in Europe, there are very few countries who have a register, so you have the exact numbers for the neonaticides.
I've been amazed at the ability or the capacity to not experience pain in childbirth. That, you know, women will say, well, I just thought I had to have a bowel movement. And one patient I saw in Pittsburgh delivered a baby, put the baby out back behind a barn, and got on a horse and did a cross-country jumping event after she gave birth to this kid in the barn bathroom. And her colleagues at the barn found this cat crying out back and discovered this baby girl. And, you know, in each case, I've been amazed at how that really stresses or validates the idea that this baby just is not there. I mean, you know, they give birth and say, oh, you know, I mean, how could you give birth and get on a horse and ride? And she was eventually taken to the women's hospital in Pittsburgh because they suspected her, and she had to have sutures. She had perineal tears. So this capacity to not feel, to me, is really fascinating and part of this terrible experience.
Well, I think it also speaks to the extent of the dissociation, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, Dr. Lewis and I had a case in Ohio, the very thing you're talking about, Kathy, where this woman in the aftermath of giving birth went out for a hamburger and with some friends and drove a car and then came back. And when the police finally came to the sorority house, she was sitting on her bed cross-legged, working on a term paper, and they asked her, you know, is everything okay? And she said, yeah, everything is fine and there's no problem. And then when they finally took her to the hospital, same thing. She had deep vaginal lacerations that needed to be repaired and no sense of the pain at all.
You know, I can understand why you want to change from denial to untreated, right? And that's mainly, I believe, for the public, because we know that denial is very powerful. And that's why I went back to Genet and looked at his work on dissociation and denial. And that you can move from denial into a dissociative psychosis. So, you know, you see people with, you know, heart conditions who, you know, decide to go running or something because they deny that they're ill. And again, I can see why, you know, for me, in my mind, and maybe, you know, denial feels very powerful. And that's why I would keep it. On the other hand, I understand because the public does not get that.
Well, I think also, Meg, as we've been having our conversations and thinking about, you know, what do we want to call this? I think the concern also is that in the courtroom, there's an automatic conclusion that is drawn by the state and by the prosecution, and that is when we use the word denial, the understanding on the part of the state is that she knew it, so she hid it, and then she killed it.
Right. Yeah.
And because it was unwanted, to use Phil Resnick's categories, right?
Yeah.
And we're hoping, how do we move away from that idea, which I believe, and I think some of us also believe, that is firmly entrenched in the courtroom way of thinking about things.
No, that's a absolutely legitimate. Yeah, and I think correct perception.
So, I mean, this is an ongoing conversation. I mean, it doesn't end with today's salon, How do we
It will
continue to think about this in ways that will move some kind of shift or change in the courtroom?
And there'll be more and more cases.
Yes,
coming
there
out.
will be.
Hmm.
Thank you for these amazing presentations. I mean, they were really fantastic. And I think one thing I was struck by, particularly the case, is just the system's failures for that individual from far, far, far before the pregnancy even took place, and it's sort of a statement of the cruelty of all these different systems, that so much violence was ignored for this person. And then the moment that she had this episode, then everybody noticed and came down on her. And that seems so emblematic of, like, I don't, maybe this is a little too much of my own thoughts about this, but it seems emblematic of how the systems are constructed. And I'm just wondering, like, if looking
Blame the
more-
victim.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And I was just curious, about, in terms of the Austrian system, whether there is more understanding and humanity around some of these cases, relative to what we have here.
Well, that is what I would try to explain. We have this really liberal law, infanticide law, 1 to 5 years, but it is overruled in some cases, and then they still get lifelong prison. If there is a very conservative judge, and it can happen also, unfortunately.
I like that question about, it reminds me of your book, Brooke, about who's really responsible here. We pin it on like your patient, we pin it on that patient, and that she didn't have a chance. It's just like, who's responsible? There's this abdication of any kind of responsibility, and it's dumped on the poor person who is basically a victim herself.
And how
You
many
know-
of these cases do we see that look exactly the same?
Well, the
Yeah.
other thing, I mean, that I struggle with, since the neonaticides I've done, mostly postpartum psychosis, we know that these women are not responsible. And I really do feel it is the misogyny of psychiatry, and that we really failed. I mean, women were really failed back then, when all this, when all of it came about.
We kind of bought into it, didn't we?
Yes,
I mean, we as a field.
yes.
I was thinking about with the recent news of gun violence and parents being held accountable for their minor children who've used guns against others. What a refreshing trend that is. And maybe that, we can think about it that way, right? Especially for, like, this case. She was a minor, she's still a minor. And all of the family's denial landed in her. She was the holder of it, right? Psychologically, even transgenerationally. She acted it out, but she is not to blame. She's really not, she really didn't have the history of committing all the crimes.
Right.
So
I think
I
one
like
of the
that
other
idea,
issues,
Brooke.
I think one of the other issues that we deal with in the courtroom is that it is so embedded in motive. We're talking here clinically. We're looking at the underpinnings. We're looking at trauma. We're looking at intergenerational history. We're looking at things that the court, unfortunately, sadly, they only care about it maybe a little bit when it comes to mitigating a sentence, but it's not part of the overall kind of consideration of how cases are, thought about. They're thought about in terms of motive, and how do we shift that? And the motives that go back to 1969, that list of motives, altruistic filicide, the unwanted child, accident, they're still being used in the courtroom today.
Well, I have to tell you something that Phil Resnick and I, when I first came out, supporting these women, and I gave an interview. At that time, I thought that Phil Resnick was dead. So, so the forensic people were not happy with me. So this is the first time I'm working with Phil Resnick on the Lindsay Clancy case. And he said something in an email to me because he asked me kind of a favor. And I said, but there was, like, let me just say, a little hint of an insult. And I said, I know you are angry at me and, not very fond of my work and whatever. And he said, oh, Meg, I don't hold any, what was it called? What is it?
And animus.
Animus. Thank you very much. I don't hold any animus towards you. But I was just bothered that you felt they were not responsible at all.
We all have our Dr. Resnick stories.
Sure. Yeah.
Diane, I can't agree more. I think the motives is what really gets court into the wrong direction, and really the question is how we can reverse that. I think this is the crucial point. Thank you for telling. Yeah, because the unwanted child, this is ridiculous.
Of course it is.
Yeah,
of course it is.
And then women, when they are asked why this happened, they say, I don't know, please tell me why this happened. They don't have a motive. So we have motives in our data set, but I don't buy any of these motives. This is court came up with this motive, or the forensic expert.
Right.
It's all the same story. Yeah, it's not the motive.
Right.
Thank you for that.
And so as clinicians, we are pigeonholed to have to work with how the court thinks about these things, and wiggle ourselves into how the court perceives all of this in terms of how we diagnose it. And, it's a very complicated issue. We need to do another one of these salons. And we will talk about that in our special interest group, but I would invite all of you who are on the line today to please come to one of our meetings. We meet the last Tuesday of every month in the mornings. It's 8:30 in the morning where I am, where we meet, so you can figure out where that is in the world, where you are, but we would love to have you join us in our think tank. And thank you for coming and being with us today, and we hope it was really helpful.
Thanks for facilitating this, Diana.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Bye,
Wonderful.
everyone.
Happy
I'll talk to you,
holidays.
Clara.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Happy holidays.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Hi, Brooke.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.